Hello, my name is Patrick Green and I'm the project manager for the New Life for Welsh Raised Bogs project in Wales. So I'm just going to talk you through the project and talk about what our aims and objectives are for the project over the remaining part of the project, which is the next 3 years. Okay, so the aim of the project is to restore 7 of the most important lowland raised bog sites in Wales. It's a 5.5-year project. It began in September 2017. It was originally due to finish in August 2021, but we've had an extension through to March 2023 to allow us to complete the works on the project. The total project cost is almost £5 million. We're working, as I say, on 7 sites across Wales, but by far the 2 biggest sites we're working on are in mid-Wales. That's at Cwrs Ffochno and Cwrs Caran, both of which are NNRs, National Nature Reserves, and SAC sites, and NRW and predecessor organisations, CCW, have had a long history with these sites. So we know these sites well, and quite a bit of work's gone on in the past, but still quite a lot left to do. Mid Wales, in particular, is the largest area of lowland raised bog and blanket bog in Wales. So it's a very important area for peatlands in general. Okay, I'll just introduce the project team. So we have 8 staff. Myself up there in the left-hand corner as project manager. We have 2 project and monitoring officers, which are Jack Simpson and Jake White. We have 2 assistant project officers, Fleur and Ben there. Cloudy in the middle is our finance officer, and Joe helps Cloudy and Dana with communications and finance. And Dana up there in the top right is our communications officer, who deals with all of our communications, messaging, and all our social media accounts and so on. So the sites we have, as I said, some fantastic sites that we were lucky enough to work on. Of course, Caran here at Tregaron is one of our biggest sites. We've got Roscoch, which is down near Builthwells in Montgomeryshire. Of course, Ffochno near Borth, another very large site just next to the estuary, which many of you will probably know. We've got Esgrin Bottom down in Pembrokeshire, Carmel near Crosshands, Corsgoch, which is near Tralsfynydd up in the north, and Windy, which is in Crickhowell. So what's the aim of the project? Well, the aim of the project really is to bring peatland, lowland raised bog, into favourable condition. We know from various surveys that these sites are still emitting CO2 in many places, and that they're not in good condition in terms of sphagnum growth, and therefore, you know, they're not capturing carbon, they're not producing the biodiversity they should, and all the other benefits that flow from peatland restoration. So, you know, many of these sites across Wales, not only the 7 that we're dealing with in this project, were found during the Lowland Peatland Survey. Lowland raised bogs are by far most impacted peatland type. You know, they have typical biodiversity, they've got significant peat thickness. You know, in many places it's 4 meters plus. Many are non-statutory, though the 7 that we're dealing with are statutory sites. And there's less than half of them are left. So out of the 4,000 hectares that we were pretty sure existed at one point, there's only about 1,800 hectares left. So, you know, important that we get in there and start managing these sites. So, you know, from the schematic you can see here, you've got basically a sort of a wet crown of the bog, and in good conditions, the water table lies within about 15 centimetres of the surface for much of the year. And this is not the case on many of these sites. You know, where you have got this water lying within 15 centimetres of the surface, you know, this is conducive to sphagnum growth and ongoing sort of peat accrual. But, you know, where you get drained and desiccated areas, sort of on the margins and so on, with sharper hydraulic gradients, this encourages the growth of rank molinia and a more dynamic sort of water table regime, and this doesn't allow sphagnum to flourish. So the idea is to improve the hydrology, remove rank vegetation, dense scrub, scattered scrub, Molinia, improve the grazing regime. But a key aspect is improving the hydrology for the sort of long-term benefit of these sites. Okay, so what are some of the things we're hoping to do within the project? So the main actions really are raising and stabilizing water levels, and to do this we're using low elevation contour bunding. In fact, we're building over 64 kilometers of new low elevation contour bunds, which we think will benefit over 622 hectares of bog habitat. And you can see the picture in the top right there. We've got excavators with quite lightweight excavators with wide tracks, sometimes working off bog mats, trying to put in these low elevation contour bunds. So effectively, you're taking these sort of undesiccated, in inverted commas, good peat, making this into sort of low elevation contour bunds, which effectively forms a water seal around the site. So we put in a number of these, and this reduces the hydrological gradient and hopefully leads to the establishment and flourishing of sphagnum. We're also raising and stabilizing water levels using dams wherever that's needed, restoring critical drainage regimes, sort of marginal drainage regimes, and treating bog surfaces. As I mentioned, the management of invasive scrub and the Molinia is a key part of the project. So in all, we're renovating 33 kilometers of existing bunds as well as the 64 kilometers of new bunds. We're installing dams to block over 5.5 kilometers of ditches, and we're installing plastic piling dams across shrinkage cracks, and around 2.5 kilometers of large peat dams on bog edges. And we think, in terms of the sort of marginal drainage features, we'll be restoring about 6,000 meters, almost 6,000 meters of marginal drainage features. The machine in the bottom right is interesting. We bought this at the beginning of the project. It's called a piston bully. And some of you might recognize them from the Alps. They're used as snow plows in the Alps. And you might have seen them on your winter holidays grooming skiing pistes. So this is a specialist bit of kit we bought in from Germany with a big cutting head on the front. In fact, we have two of these and a hopper on the back. So it can drive across very, very wet sites. It's got a very, very low ground pressure, something like 6 times less than that of a human footprint, and can mow Molinia, and we can capture that in the hopper. It gets to a lot of work. Really, really impressive bit of kit. We're also using things like high end cattle in order to improve the grazing wherever possible. Some of the grazers have been impressed with these beasts and keen to get them on the site, and so it's good to see these guys out there. Okay, so in terms of the sort of tree removal work, as I say, where you're getting dry areas, particularly on the margins of these sites, you're getting a lot of woodland establishment, particularly birch and willow, sometimes scattered out towards the more wet areas, but often quite dense on the edges. And of course, as these trees grow, they start throwing out a lot of seed, and that leads to further establishment and further drying out of the sites. So a key part of the project is to remove dense and scattered scrub. So we're clearing around 32 hectares of dense scrub. As you'd imagine on these sites, it's not as straightforward as a normal woodland situation. You need specialist contractors, specialist machinery, and we also need to be really careful because we're on SSE, SSI sites about use of any chemical, and we're using things like eco plugs and stem injection to try and reduce the chemical load when we're treating stumps and so on. We're also removing 438 hectares of scattered willow and birch across the 7 sites. In terms of the monitoring, that's a vital part of our project because we need to be able to show that the project actions are actually creating the desired effects. We have a contract with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, the BGS, the British Geological Society, and the University of East London to do some of this work. And we're looking at sort of 5 key elements. We have this biodiversity and vegetation monitoring aspect. We have hydrological monitoring where we use things like dip wells in order to check hydrology. So those will go in and around our interventions, such as the bunds I mentioned earlier. And then we have carbon flux, which we are monitoring by means of sort of greenhouse gas recording equipment, remote sensing and earth observation, and some socio-economic monitoring to see what effect the project has on the surrounding sort of socio-economic situation. So another key part of the project is the communication and engagement aspect. So, we need to get our message out there that these sites are really important for a whole range of reasons. The carbon and climate crisis being a major one, the biodiversity crisis being another. Also, the fantastic sites for recreation that play a role in flood defence and so on and so forth. So we have a big communications program. We put a lot of press releases out, try and get as much as we possibly can in terms of media coverage. We've created a website. We also run social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and more recently Instagram, to sort of promote what we're doing and the sort of activities that are going on the sites. This aspect of sort of community engagement is more local. The mosaics you can see here we involved the local community working at the local Red Kite Museum in Tregaron to create these beautiful mosaics of some of the machinery and some of the operations on site, and some of the biodiversity that can be found on site as well. This really engaged people. They're very beautiful, and everyone got a lot of satisfaction from this bit of work. As I mentioned, if you want to follow us, you can follow us on our social media. We regularly post what the project's up to, how we're getting on. We'll also be hosting a conference in 2022 as part of the IUCN Peatland series that will take place in Aberystwyth, hopefully in 2022, with our project being a kind of centerpiece of that conference, and that'll act as our end of project conference. So we will have people coming from all over the UK and beyond to hear about the project. There'll be site visits and so on. So anybody who wants to come along to that, probably September, October 2022, that needs to go on the diary. This is just another aspect of the communication side of the project. We produce a newsletter, site information panels, temporary signage where we've got operations taking place. So really trying to inform the public why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we removing trees, which is always potentially controversial? Why are we cutting millennia? Why have we got big machines and excavators and things on these beautiful natural sites? We attend events and agricultural shows to try and engage with the agricultural community. And we also run a volunteering program. So trying to get volunteers out, training people up, giving them access to these lovely environments, and also helping the project with key tasks like installing dip wells, reading dip wells, installing signage, biodiversity monitoring, recording, and so on. So yeah, challenges, turns about challenges. Obviously, COVID-19 is a major challenge for everyone at the moment, and how we're going to work with that and how that will affect the sort of contractor base and what we can do on site. Luckily it's all outside work and social distancing is relatively easy. So we think we should be able to to work around most of the challenges that COVID-19 is posing. I mean, another key challenge is just the volume of work to complete in the timescales. I mean, you know, weather is an obvious challenge, and if that gets in the way, it's generally winter work. We generally start the key operations in mid-August, after the sort of bird breeding nesting season, and run them through till sort of mid-February. But obviously in Wales, particularly West Wales, the weather can put a spanner in that works, and that could be a key challenge going forward. Another one is contractor availability. You know, this is very specialist work. Contractors are in high demand. Obviously, the COVID situation won't have helped. So, you know, that's another key potential challenge. And then obviously training new staff, getting new staff up to speed, another challenge. So that's, in terms of the sort of future of Welsh peatlands and lowland raised bogs, I think Wales is in a great place to lead on the restoration and management of the environment in general, and peatlands in particular. You know, we've got a lot of these sites. We've got a history of managing them and trying to manage them well. I think there's a much greater awareness amongst the public of the importance of these sites and politicians. You know, in Wales, we've got the necessary legislation with the Environment Act. We have area statements. We have a single environment body in NRW. We've got a lot of active, very proactive NGOs, and the Welsh Government seem to fully understand the importance of natural solutions, such as planting woodland and restoring peatlands in the battle against climate change and biodiversity decline. So I think, you know, we're in a great position from a legislative point of view and a public support point of view. I think now we need to move from the sort of planning to the implementation stage, and crucially doing it at scale. And of course, that comes down to not only the sort of political will, but the money being available or made available to do that. And obviously that's going to be difficult, particularly in the climate we find ourselves in at the moment. So hopefully the Life Welsh Raised Bogs project can demonstrate how much can be achieved in a few years by a sort of properly funded programme and a dedicated team. And we'll welcome you all to come and visit our sites in the future. Diolch, thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you very much to the organisers for this opportunity to come to the Green Recovery Wales event to talk about this work, following on from the excellent talk just now given by Patrick Green about the Welsh Raised Bogs Life project. And I think that project illustrates very nicely the need for and scale of peatland restoration in Wales, and also some of the great innovative techniques which that project is using. So once we get back to normal times of people being able to move around the countryside, I'd encourage any of our colleagues to try and get out and see some of the project sites. So we're going to talk to you now about the wider ambition for restoring peatlands in Wales, and I'm giving this on behalf of two colleagues. The first two of us are Natural Resources Wales staff members. So I'm Pete Jones, and I'm NRW's lead specialist advisor for peatland ecosystems. And with me is Dr. Roswen Leonard, who in fact used to work on the Welsh Raised Bogs Life project, and is now working on this national programme. Roswen has been appointed as the project manager for our programme of peat work in 2020 to 2021. And then also Mr. James Cook, who provides Welsh Government's lead on peat and works in their soil policy and agricultural land use planning unit within the Department for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs. So that's the three of us. So I'll just move on to the next slide and give a little bit of background. So to start with then, Welsh peat soils or deep peat soils, these are soils around about half a metre or more deep. These extend over an estimated 90,000 hectares, or some 4% of the Welsh landscape, and they occur throughout Wales. Wherever you are in Wales, there's a peatland not very far away from you. The map on the right, prepared in 2014, was done under a Welsh Government contract by the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, supported by the British Geological Survey and Natural Resources Wales, and it shows the distribution of deep peat deposits in Wales. So kind of immediately obvious from this is an important concentration of peat and peatland habitat along the upland spine of the country in the form of blanket bog, peatland habitat for which the UK bears special responsibility in global terms, because much of the resources here and elsewhere in northwest Europe. Less immediately obvious on this map are all the smaller lowland peatland sites dotted throughout the country, really, but with particularly important concentrations in Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Ynys Môn. And it's from Ynys Môn that I'm speaking to you tonight. These peatlands support a rich and specialised but often threatened biodiversity, and also serve as our most significant single terrestrial carbon store. This is Welsh peatlands as a whole now, and potentially, of course, when in good condition, a carbon sink, with peatlands serving to regulate the emissions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, as well as delivering a range of other important and what are now referred to as ecosystem services. Among some of the more important of these are obviously the provision of grazing and stock rearing land, natural flood risk management, and also the heritage, archaeological and scientific importance of peatlands. So I think it's perfectly justifiable to regard our peatlands as one of our principal natural and environmental assets in Wales. Well, unfortunately, significant tracts of our peatland resource exhibit signs of degradation of one form or another due to a wide variety of factors, including past land management and land use, drainage, and also atmospheric pollution. And this has diminished the peatland biodiversity resource on many sites and created further problems which have really only recently come to the fore, notably that degraded peatlands emit greenhouse gases and also leak carbon to the atmosphere and the wider environment at a rate many times higher than that of what one might term near natural peatlands, peatlands in good condition. And of course, this means that they're failing to provide some of the important ecosystem services which are associated with peatlands in good condition. So the aim is to try and restore peatlands wherever possible to good ecological condition. Statutory protection, a wide range of land management schemes and a range of restoration projects undertaken by many partners over the years have yielded big restoration gains, big benefits, but a significant job of work remains to be done. And it's absolutely fitting that peatland restoration is now seen as a key strand of our response in Wales to both the nature and climate change emergencies. So just moving on to the third slide here. So how will this be taken forward? Well, Welsh Government's Climate Change Adaptation Plan was published last year and recognises that more effort is needed to restore peatland habitats and includes an important action for Natural Resources Wales to produce a 5-year costed national action plan for restoring peatlands. This is underpinned by a ministerial decision issued on the 26th of June 2019, which affirmed the government's ambition for peatlands to be brought under sustainable management in Wales. More recently, in this current year, 2020-2021, Welsh Government has provided an additional £1 million of funding to NRW for peatland restoration across Wales, and we are currently working with a range of partners to deliver this, including the Welsh Peatlands project led by the Snowdonia National Park and funded by Welsh Government's Sustainable Management Scheme, and other partners as well, with important links to the LIFE project that you just heard about. In addition to the 1 million, Welsh Government has provided further revenue support for a dedicated team of staff within the action programme for this first year of 4 staff led by Dr. Leonard as the project manager, and Welsh Government have also commissioned a significant programme of work to further develop the peatland evidence base. As part of the first year's work in the programme, we're planning to relaunch the Welsh Peatlands Action Group later this year or early in 2021 to help shape and support programme delivery. So just moving on to the final slide here. So what ideally do we think a national programme should address? Well, there are a range of obvious priority action areas which we need to tackle in the programme in order to address both the nature and the climate change emergencies, and so these are listed here. Each is going to be addressed to some degree as part of the Welsh Government funded programme this year, and each represents significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions currently, as well as contributing, once we've tackled them, to biodiversity degradation. And really focusing action in these areas is the intention is it'll simultaneously enhance the resilience of our peatland ecosystems, and ecosystem resilience is an important part of our work to secure the sustainable management of natural resources in Wales, but also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to contribute to a wide range of ecosystem service benefits. And just out of this list, I've just offered three examples here in picture form on the right. So going from top right to bottom right, peat erosion will be familiar to many who walk in the Welsh uplands. It results from a range of factors, including adverse past management and fire history, although some is apparently sort of cyclical and natural in nature. But where severe, it leads to the loss of the peat body and drying out of the peat, and is only likely to get worse under climate change. So further action is needed to build on the excellent work of a range of partners already to date, including the Brecon Beacons and Snowdonia National Parks, the National Trust and RSPB, to mention only a few really, to stabilise these eroding landscapes and to try and restore ideally active peat formation. And this should be achievable if we coordinate our efforts and if we put resources towards it. And we're lucky in Wales in that it's not fortunately hugely extensive, so this should be eminently achievable. Turning to the middle picture, peatland drainage is much more widespread as an issue and is known to result in increased greenhouse gas emissions and carbon loss, and of course biodiversity degradation. And we've got a lot of good knowledge and experience in Wales on how to address this. And then finally, towards the bottom right, again, as many who walk in the Welsh uplands will know, many of our blanket bog systems are heavily dominated by purple moorgrass and Molinia, and these may be emitting significant amounts of greenhouse gases, and they certainly don't support the range and quality of biodiversity that they should. So restoring these and enabling sustainable grazing by a mix of stock, ideally including cattle, could achieve very large biodiversity and potentially greenhouse gas emissions improvements, and potentially also flood risk benefits, and also greatly reduce fire risk. And these are very important considerations as climate change kind of goes forward. So progressing action in each of these areas needs to be undertaken in partnership and using all available mechanisms to us for both the initial capital restoration phase and the longer term sustainable management phases. And these mechanisms would include all the kind of typical things that we've been doing in the past, but also new ones. So the future sustainable land management scheme and emerging payment for ecosystem services mechanisms, including the peatland code. But what we see the national programme as providing, hopefully, is a core sort of nucleus of expertise, funding and coordination to really achieve traction in Wales in restoring the Welsh peatland resource. And we look forward to talking to many of you about this in the coming months, both individually and within the context of the Welsh Peatland Action Group. That is the end of the presentation, so thank you for your attention this evening. Good night.